Right, picking back up with chapter 17, we're on page 228 if you're following along in the book. We're on page 91 if you're following along online. And we were hearing about the Yule household, which was really a rundown shack right in the dump of Maycomb. Sounds like a pretty terrible living situation, but there's one kind of abnormality about the place, and we're going to start with hearing about that in the chapter beginning at the top of 91. One corner of the yard, though, bewildered Maycomb. Against the fence, in a line, were 6 chipped enamel slop jars holding brilliant red geraniums, cared for as tenderly as if they belonged to Miss Maudie Atkinson, had Miss Maudie deigned to permit a geranium on her premises. People said they were Mayella Yule's. Okay, so first of all, a geranium's a kind of flower. You might want to Google it just so you can better picture it and see that imagery. But we're getting some indirect characterization here from Harper Lee about the character of Mayella Yule. First of all, Mayella Yule is the oldest of the Yule children. She's also the victim in this alleged rape, allegedly committed by Tom Robinson. So Mayella Yule, in the midst of all this dump and garbage and decay, have these chipped enamel jars where she's got these brilliant red geraniums that she's growing on the premises. What does that say about her? What is Harper Lee trying to tell us about Mayella with that detail? It's going to be important to think about as we move forward. Nobody was quite sure how many children were on the place. Some people said 6, others said 9. There were always several dirty-faced ones at the window when anyone passed by. Nobody had occasion to pass by except at Christmas, when the church delivered baskets, and when the mayor of Maycomb asked us to please help the garbage collector by dumping our own trees and trash. Atticus took us with him last Christmas when he complied with the mayor's request. A dirt road ran from the highway past the dump down to a small Negro settlement some 500 yards beyond the Yules. It was necessary either to back out to the highway or to go the full length of the road and turn around. Most people turned around in the Negroes' front yards. In the frosty December dusk, their cabins looked neat and snug, with pale blue smoke rising from the chimneys and doorways glowing amber from the fires inside. There were delicious smells about, chicken, bacon frying crisp as the twilight air. Jem and I detected squirrel cooking, but it took an old countryman like Atticus to identify possum and rabbit, aromas that vanished when we rode back past the Yule residence. So look at how those two different households are contradicted, that of the Yules and that of the cabins where the black community lives. Two very different dwellings. All the little man on the witness stand had that made him any better than his nearest neighbors was that if scrubbed with lye soap in very hot water, his skin was white. "Mr. Robert Yule?" asked Mr. Gilmer. "That's my name, Cap'n," said the witness. Mr. Gilmer's back stiffened a little, and I felt sorry for him. Perhaps I'd better explain something now. I've heard that lawyers' children, on seeing their parents in court in the heat of argument, get the wrong idea. They think opposing counsel to be the personal enemies of their parents. They suffer agonies and are surprised to see them often go out arm in arm with their tormentors during the first recess. This was not true of Jem and me. We acquired no traumas from watching our father win or lose. I'm sorry that I can't provide any drama in this respect. If I did, it would not be true. We could tell, however, when debate became more acrimonious than professional. But this was from watching lawyers other than our father. I never heard Atticus raise his voice in my life, except to a deaf witness. Mr. Gilmer was doing his job, as Atticus was doing his. Besides, Mr. Yule was Mr. Gilmer's witness, and he had no business being rude to him, of all people. Are you the father of Mayella Ewell? Was the next question. Well, if I ain't, I can't do nothing about it now. Her ma's dead, was the answer. Judge Taylor stirred. He turned slowly in his swivel chair and looked benignly at the witness. Are you the father of Mayella Ewell? He asked in a way that made the laughter below us stop suddenly. Yes, sir, said Mr. Ewell meekly. Judge Taylor went on in tones of goodwill. This the first time you've ever been in court? I don't recall ever seeing you here. At the witness's affirmative nod, he continued. Well, let's get something straight. There will be no more audibly obscene speculations on any subject from anybody in this courtroom as long as I'm sitting here. Do you understand? Mr. Ewell nodded, but I don't think he did. Judge Taylor sighed and said, All right. Mr. Gilmer? Thank you, sir. Now, Mr. Ewell, would you please tell us, in your own words, what happened on the evening of November 21st, please? Jem grinned and pushed his hair back. Just in your own words was Mr. Gilmer's trademark. We often wondered who else's words Mr. Gilmer was afraid his witness might employ. Well, the night of November 21, I was coming in from the woods with a load of kindling. Just as I got to the fence, I heard Mayella screaming like a stuck hog inside the house. Here, Judge Taylor glanced sharply at the witness and must have decided his speculations devoid of ill intent, for he subsided sleepily. What time was it, Mr. Ewell? Well, it was just 'fore sundown. Well, I was saying, Mayella was screaming fit to beat Jesus. Another glance from the bench silenced Mr. Ewell. Yes, she was screaming, said Mr. Gilmer. Mr. Ewell looked confusedly at the judge. Well, Mayella was raising this holy racket, so I dropped my load and run as fast as I could. But I run into the fence. But when I got distangled, I run up to the window and I seen... Mr. Ewell's face grew scarlet. He stood up and pointed his finger at Tom Robinson. Why, I seen that black Negro yonder riding on my Mayella. So serene was Judge Taylor's court that he had few occasions to use his gavel. He hammered fully 5 minutes. Atticus was on his feet at the bench saying something to him, and Mr. Heck Tate, as first officer of the county, stood in the middle aisle, quelling the packed courtroom. Behind us, there was an angry, muffled groan from the colored people. Reverend Sykes leaned across Dill and me, pulling at Jem's elbow. Mr. Jem, he said, you better take Miss Jean Louise home. Mr. Jem, you hear me? Jem turned his head. Scout, go home. Dill, you and Scout, go home. You gotta make me first, I said, remembering Atticus's blessed dictum. Jem scowled furiously at me and then said to Reverend Sykes, I think it's okay, Reverend. She doesn't understand it. I was mortally offended. Why, I most certainly do. I can understand anything you can. Oh, hush. She doesn't understand it, Reverend. She ain't 9 yet. Reverend Sykes's black eyes were anxious. Does Mr. Finch know you all are here? This ain't fit for Miss Jean Louise, or you boys either. Jem shook his head. Nah, I can't see this far away. It's all right, Reverend. I knew Jem would win, because I knew nothing could make him leave now. Dill and I were safe for a while. Atticus could see us from where he was, if he looked. As Judge Taylor banged his gavel, Mr. Ewell was sitting smugly in the witness chair, surveying his handiwork. With one phrase, he had turned happy picnickers into a sulky, tense, murmuring crowd, slowly being hypnotized by gavel taps, lessening in intensity, until the only sound in the courtroom was a dim pink, pink, pink. The judge might have been rapping the bench with a pencil. In possession of his court once more, Judge Taylor leaned back in his chair. He looked suddenly weary. His age was showing, and I thought about what Atticus had said. He and Mrs. Taylor didn't kiss much. He must have been nearly 70. "There has been a request," Judge Taylor said, "that the courtroom be cleared of spectators, or at least women and children. A request that will be denied for the time being. People generally see what they look for and hear what they listen for, and they have a right to subject their children to it. But I can assure you of one thing. You will receive what you see and hear in silence, or you will leave this courtroom. But you won't leave it until the whole boiling of you come before me on contempt charges. Mr. Ewell, you will keep your testimony within the confines of Christian English usage, if that is possible. Proceed, Mr. Gilmer." Mr. Ewell reminded me of a deaf mute. I was sure he had never heard the words Judge Taylor directed at him. His mouth struggled silently with them, but their import registered on his face. Smugness faded from it, replaced by a dogged earnestness that fooled Judge Taylor not at all. For as long as Mr. Ewell was on the stand, the judge kept his eyes on him, as if daring him to make a false move. Mr. Gilmer and Atticus exchanged glances. Atticus was sitting down again. His fists rested on his cheek, and we could not see his face. Mr. Gilmer looked rather desperate. A question from Judge Taylor made him relax. "Mr. Ewell, did you see the defendant having sexual intercourse with your daughter?" "Yes, I did." The spectators were quiet, but the defendant said something. Atticus whispered to him, and Tom Robinson was silent. "You say you were at the window?" asked Mr. Gilmer. "Yes, sir." "Well, how far is it from the ground?" "About 3 foot." "Did you have a clear view of the room?" "Yes, sir." "And how did the room look?" "Well, it was all slung about, like there was a fight." "And what did you do when you saw the defendant?" "Well, I run around the house to get in, but he run out the front door just ahead of me. I saw who he was all right. I was too distracted about Mayella to run after him. I run in the house, and she was lying on the floor squalling." "Then what did you do?" "Why, I run for Tate quick as I could. I knowed who it was all right. Lived down yonder in that negro nest, and passed that house every day. Judge, I asked this county for 15 years to clean out that nest down yonder. They're dangerous to live around, sides devaluing my property." "Thank you, Mr. Ewell," said Mr. Gilmer hurriedly. The witness made a hasty descent from the stand and ran smack into Atticus, who had risen to question him. Judge Taylor permitted the court to laugh. "Well, now, just a minute, sir," said Atticus genially. "Could I ask you a question or two?" Mr. Ewell backed up into the witness chair, settled himself, and regarded Atticus with haughty suspicion, an expression common to Maycomb witnesses when confronted by opposing counsel. All right, in the next video, we're going to get to hear Atticus question Bob Ewell and see what he can get out of him. Tune in.